My name is Inslee Drew Barnes, and this is the night everything I thought I knew about family burned to ash. On my 18th birthday, I blew out the candles on a grocery store cake that tasted like sugar and sadness. The tiny dining room in our Wichita house was cold enough to feel like a warning. Before I could even swallow my last breath, my stepmother slammed a stack of papers onto the table so hard the candles flickered. Sign this right now or get out forever. Kimberly Brooks snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut bone. She jabbed her acrylic nails at the old copy of my trust fund like it was some kind of weapon. $1.4 million was never meant for a little brat like you. That money belongs to this family. My dad, Richard Carter, stared at the floor like he had forgotten how to speak. My stepbrother Colton just leaned back in his chair, smirking like he was watching the best show of his life. I didn't sign. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the frozen sidewalk with nothing but a backpack, a cracked phone, and the Kansas wind slicing through my hoodie. The thermometer blinked -7 degrees. My own father locked the door behind me without a word. But even that wasn't the worst part of the night. I walked the same route I'd taken every evening for months. Same cracked sidewalk, same flickering streetlight, same dark corner where the same elderly woman sat quietly on flattened cardboard. She wore a thin coat in a winter that didn't forgive anybody, and she kept a small tin cup in front of her like a quiet invitation to kindness. Like every night, I dug out my last $5 bill and slipped it in, but this time her hand shot up and clamped around my wrist with a strength that didn't make sense for someone her age. Her dry fingers trembled as she pulled me close, her eyes wide with something that looked like pure terror. "Listen close, child," she whispered. "Tonight you do not sleep on the street. Not the park. Not anywhere they expect you to be. Find a cheap motel, pay cash, lock the door. And tomorrow morning, come back here. I have something that will save your life." I stared at her, breath fogging in the air between us, not understanding how a stranger could sound more worried about me than the people who shared my blood. She let go, her hand dropping back to her lap like the warning had drained what little energy she had left. "Go," she said. "Now." So I did. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you most, you might understand the emptiness that followed me down those streets. If you're watching this somewhere cold tonight, drop your city in the comments. No one deserves to face the night alone. I walked east on Kellogg until I saw a faded pink neon sign flickering against the dark sky. Starlight Motel, vacancy. The lobby smelled like stale smoke and desperation. The clerk barely looked at me as I placed 38 wrinkled dollars on the counter. "Cash only," he grunted. "No ID. No questions." Perfect. Room 12 smelled like bleach and old cigarettes. The blanket was thin, and the heater rattled like it wanted to give up. But the deadbolt worked, and for one night, that was enough. I kept my boots on, curled up with my coat still on, listened to the wind claw at the window, and I cried until my chest ached. The next morning, I walked straight back to the corner. The elderly woman was already there, same cardboard, same cup, same tired eyes. When I crouched down, she looked at me with a long, searching gaze. "You knew something was coming," I said quietly. She nodded once. "Call me Mrs. Evelyn Rose Harland." And yes, I've been watching out for you, child. The people in that house want you gone, badly. Those words tightened something deep inside me, so I told her everything. The trust, the screaming, the threats, the eviction. How my stepmother kept waving around the old copy of the document like it was her personal Bible. Mrs. Evelyn listened without interruption, her face expressionless except for the tightening of her jaw. When I finished, she nodded slowly, like she'd heard the story 100 times from 100 different broken places. That afternoon, I walked into a 24-hour quick trip and begged the manager for any shift, any hours, anything. He hired me as overnight cashier for $10 cash an hour, no paperwork. No questions. Nights became a rhythm I clung to for survival. Clock in at 11, mop floors, stock shelves. Ring up truckers at 2 a.m. Ring up club kids at 4. Leave exhausted at 7. I lived off 99-cent noodles and day-old donuts. Every shift, I put aside $5 or $10. And every morning, I walked back to that same corner and slipped the money into Mrs. Evelyn's cup. She never asked where it came from. She just squeezed my cold hands between hers and whispered, "Thank you." Some nights, a sharp chemical smell drifted from the park. I told myself it was the gas station across the street. Told myself anything that let me sleep without thinking too much. Until the morning, I walked through the park and saw yellow tape blocking every entrance. Fire trucks gone. Benches melted. Smoke still curling off the blackened ground. The corner, where I kept my backpack under a tarp, was now nothing but ash. Someone else's burned sleeping bag lay curled like a dead thing nearby. Fire investigator lifted a half-melted water bottle with a rag stuffed into the neck. A Molotov. The exact benches I used to sleep on. The exact corner I hid my things. Gone up, my stomach dropped so violently I thought I'd throw up. Someone had wiped out my last fallback. Someone wanted me without shelter, without safety, without options, and someone wanted it badly enough to burn the whole place down the next morning. I woke up in a room bigger than the entire house I grew up in. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, and for a moment, I forgot what had happened the night before. Then I looked to my right. My grandfather was sitting quietly on a velvet chair, staring outside at the ocean. He looked peaceful, but his eyes carried decades of battles no one ever bothered to understand. When he heard me shift, he turned and smiled, not the fragile smile he used to force, but a real one. The kind I had never seen before. "You're safe now," he said softly, "truly safe." I didn't know how to respond. A part of me still felt like everything would disappear. Like I would wake up back in that cold street outside the mansion that never felt like home. But then his lawyer arrived. Files, photos, documents, everything my family had hidden. Laid out on a polished marble table. Each page was a truth I had never been allowed to know. How they stole his company. How they left him to die. How they made him disappear because his existence threatened their comfort. And then how he rebuilt everything from nothing in complete silence, watching them from a distance, not out of hatred, but out of heartbreak. When I looked at him, tears stung my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. He took my hand with a gentleness that broke me. "Because I didn't want you to grow up carrying my wounds," he said. "I wanted you to grow up carrying hope." For the first time, I understood the strength of the man standing beside me. A man who had every reason to destroy them, yet chose to rise instead. But as the lawyers kept talking, one thing became painfully clear. My parents weren't just cruel, they were scared. Scared of losing everything to the man they tried to erase, and to the granddaughter they underestimated, and they had no idea that a storm was coming, one built not from revenge, but from truth. That day, my life changed forever. Not because of the mansion, or the money, or the power, but because I finally realized that sometimes the people who break you are the reason you discover the person you were born to be, and this was only the beginning of everything they never saw coming. They discovered the truth faster than anyone expected. It started with a single phone call. We were sitting in the grand dining hall, a place so silent you could hear the ocean breathe. My grandfather was pouring tea for both of us, his hands steady for the first time in years. Then his assistant rushed in, breathless. "They know," he said. They found out you're alive and that she's with you. My heart dropped. For a moment, I felt like the scared girl standing in the snow again, the one who begged for a family that never wanted her. But my grandfather, he didn't flinch. Not even a little. They were always going to know, he said quietly. It was only a matter of time. My phone vibrated, and when I looked at the screen, my chest tightened. It was my mother. Call after call, message after message. Come home. We need to talk. You don't understand what you're doing. Please answer. Not once did she apologize. Not once did she ask if we were safe. She only cared that her world was cracking. My grandfather gently took the phone from my trembling hand. Let them speak, he said. It's time. An hour later, the gates of the mansion camera buzzed with an incoming vehicle. A black luxury car stopped outside. Even from a distance, I recognized the silhouettes inside, the people who had once claimed to be my parents. They stepped out, their confidence slipping with every second. My father looked angry. My mother looked desperate. Both looked terrified. They walked toward the mansion door, but the guards didn't move. They waited for one voice. My grandfather's. He stood tall, not as a broken man, not as the forgotten victim, but as Arthur Hale, the man they had tried to erase. Let them in, he said. The heavy doors opened and they entered, their eyes widening at the house they never expected to see from the inside. My mother's voice cracked. You're alive. My grandfather nodded. Yes, and so's the truth. My father stepped forward, trying to sound strong. This is a misunderstanding. We didn't mean, but my grandfather raised a hand, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. You threw us out, my grandfather said calmly. You called me useless. You called her a burden. Now tell me, which part of that was a misunderstanding? The room fell painfully silent. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. I didn't know who you were. That was the moment I spoke, my voice shaking but louder than it had ever been. You didn't need to know who he was, I said. You only needed to remember who you were. My words hit harder than anything else. My mother crumpled a little. My father clenched his jaw, and for the first time, they realized the truth. We didn't need them anymore, and they had already lost everything that mattered. This wasn't revenge. This was justice, and it was only the beginning. And it was only the beginning. My parents stood there, surrounded by a world they thought belonged only to people better than us. Now it belonged to the two people they had thrown away. My father was the first to snap. This isn't right, he said, voice shaking with anger he could no longer hide. You manipulated her. You turned her against us. My grandfather didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You turned her against yourself the moment you closed that door on her, he replied quietly. Don't blame me for the consequences of your own cruelty. My father opened his mouth again, but my mother suddenly broke. She collapsed to her knees, tears pouring down her face. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know it was you. I thought you were just some old man she brought home. I didn't know who you were. My grandfather closed his eyes for a moment, and then he asked a question that shattered the room. And if I had been just some old man, would your actions have been justified? Silence. My mother sobbed harder, because the truth was obvious. If he had been no one, they still would have thrown him out. My father tried to pull her up, but she pushed his hand away and cried even harder. Then my grandfather turned to me. Tell them, he said softly. Tell them what that night felt like. My throat tightened. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I begged, I said quietly. I begged you both not to throw us out. I begged you to just let us stay until the storm passed. My voice broke, and you didn't even look at me. You didn't ask why he was cold. You didn't ask why I was scared. You just closed the door. My mother covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably, but my father, he still stood stiff, frozen in his pride. You made your choices, he said coldly. And so did we. That was the moment everything changed. My grandfather stepped between us, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through stone. Then accept the consequences of your choices, he said. You can't treat people like they're disposable and expect the world to treat you kindly. He turned to his assistant, begin the paperwork. My parents looked up, confused. What paperwork? My father demanded. My grandfather gave them the truth they feared most. The documents that remove you from everything you stole from me. Everything you hid, and everything you thought belonged to you. My father's face went pale. My mother gasped, her breath catching in her throat. You can't do this. He shouted. My grandfather looked at him with the same calm strength I had come to admire. I already have, he said. The room felt suddenly colder. Not because of the mansion, but because they finally understood. This wasn't a fight. This was the moment their lies collapsed. And for the first time in my life, I saw what real justice looked like. Not loud, not violent, but quiet. An absolute. This was the breaking point, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next 48 hours felt unreal. While my parents were still standing in the mansion, stunned and shaking, my grandfather's legal team moved like a silent storm swift. Precise, unstoppable. Documents were filed. Old contracts were unsealed. Ownership papers they thought were buried forever were brought into the light. Everything they built on lies started collapsing in front of them. My father paced the room like a trapped animal. You can't just take everything, he yelled. You can't erase 20 years of work. My grandfather answered calmly. Without anger, you erased me first. And you stole your work from a man who trusted you? My mother sat on the sofa, her hands trembling, eyes red and swollen. She looked at me with a heartbreak I wasn't ready for. I never wanted to lose you, she whispered. I didn't know how to be a mother. I was scared you'd hate me. I swallowed hard. You didn't have to be perfect, I said quietly. You just had to care. Tears slipped down her cheeks. But I do care, she cried. I always cared. I just didn't know how to show it. For a moment, something inside me softened. But then I remembered the cold night, the slammed door, the fear in my grandfather's eyes. Caring wasn't enough. Not anymore. Then the phone on the table buzzed. The lawyer answered. It's done, he said. The accounts are frozen. The properties are returning to their rightful owner. They can't access anything. My father collapsed into a chair, the fight draining out of him. My company, he whispered. My reputation, my life. But my grandfather simply said, your life didn't end today. It ended the day you chose greed over family. My mother looked at me again. Can you forgive us? She asked in a shaking voice. I wanted to answer. I wanted to know what forgiveness felt like. But the truth was, I didn't know yet. I don't think you're asking for forgiveness, I said. I think you're asking for a second chance. She covered her mouth, sobbing harder. My father, still refusing to break, forced out a bitter whisper. So what now? You win, we lose. That's it? My grandfather shook his head. This was never about winning, he said. It was about truth. And truth always comes with a cost. My parents were escorted out of the mansion, not violently, but with the dignity my grandfather always believed in. Even when they didn't deserve it, they stood outside the gates, watching the life they thought they owned disappear behind doors that would never open for them again. Watched them go. A part of me hurt. A part of me healed. And a part of me finally understood something I had been trying to avoid. Losing them didn't break me. Keeping them would have. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. And beside me, my grandfather placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. This is your beginning, he said softly, not your ending. And he was right, because what came next was not revenge. It was rebirth. The mansion felt different the next morning, not because of its size, not because of the wealth, but because, for the first time, it felt like a place where I belonged. I woke up to the smell of fresh bread drifting through the hallway, sunlight warming the marble floors, and a calmness I hadn't felt in years. My grandfather was already awake. Sitting in the garden, surrounded by roses he had planted himself. He looked peaceful, but also younger, somehow, like the weight he'd carried for decades had finally begun to lift. Sit with me, he said. Smiling, I sat beside him on a bench that overlooked the ocean, the waves crashing softly against the shore. For a moment, we didn't speak. We just breath-free, unhurried, safe. This place? I whispered. It feels unreal. He nodded slowly. I built everything you see. Not to flaunt it, not to hurt anyone, but because I wanted a world where I could finally live without fear. And now? I asked. He looked at me with eyes that held years of secrets, lessons, and love. Now I want to share it with someone who deserves it. I felt a lump form in my throat. You mean me? He laughed softly. You are the only family who stayed when I had nothing. You are the only person who held my hand in the snow when the world turned its back on me. Everything I have, someday it will be yours. My breath caught. No one had ever given me anything without conditions. No one had ever chosen me, but he did, and that changed everything. As days passed, my life in the mansion began to take shape. I started meeting his staff people, who had secretly protected him while he lived in the shadows. His lawyers began showing me documents with my name on them. Trusts, shares, rights, ownerships I didn't even understand yet. He even introduced me to the board members of his company. They all bowed slightly respectfully when he said, "This is my granddaughter. She will continue what I started." I stared at him, shocked. Continue what you started? I don't know anything about business. He smiled. You don't need to know yet. You only need to know who you are. But something inside me shifted. For the first time, I began to see myself not as the girl pushed out into the cold, but as the woman who survived it. Yet even in this new world, one question kept haunting me. Why didn't he reveal the truth earlier? Why did he let my parents live in comfort for so long? Why didn't he fight back sooner? One evening, as we watched the sunset paint the sky in gold, I finally asked him, "Why did you wait all these years?" He exhaled deeply. "Because I wasn't waiting for justice," he said softly. "I was waiting for you." My heart stopped. For me. He nodded, eyes glistening. I didn't want to build an empire fueled by anger. I wanted to build a future strengthened by love. And I didn't truly have a reason to step back into the light until the night they threw us out. He placed his hand over mine. You were my reason. Tears burned my eyes, because in that moment I realized the world didn't give me a family. He did. And this new life, the second chance. It wasn't just his gift. It was our beginning. But while we were rebuilding our world, my parents were losing theirs, and sooner than we expected. They would try to return. It started with a letter. An envelope, heavy and formal, arrived on the marble countertop of the mansion. My name, written in a familiar scrawl, made my stomach twist. I didn't need to open it. I knew whose handwriting it was, but curiosity and a strange, lingering hope I didn't expect made me break the seal. The letter was short. Ensley, we made mistakes. We see that now. We want to fix this. Please meet us at the estate. We need a family again. I felt a storm of emotions, anger, disbelief. the old fear that had never fully left. I crumpled the paper in my fist, then smoothed it out. My grandfather didn't speak at first. He simply placed a hand on mine and said, "Do you want to see them?" I didn't answer. I didn't know what I wanted. Days later, a black car rolled up the long driveway, slowly approaching the mansion gates. My heart hammered, a mix of dread and something I didn't recognize. Anticipation. My father stepped out first. Shoulders stiff, jaw tight. My mother followed, her eyes wide, red from crying. Searching for a reaction from me that wasn't there, I stood in the grand hall, arms crossed, staring at the two people who had tried to erase me. They looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing, less certain. My father tried to speak. Ensley, I stopped him with a raised hand. I don't want apologies, I said. I don't want excuses. And I sure as hell don't want your pity. My mother stepped forward. I wanted to see you. To tell you we're sorry. That we love you. Love. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Because love doesn't leave someone on a frozen sidewalk, hoping strangers will save them. Love doesn't order a child's death over money. I looked at them, my voice cold but steady. You never loved me. You loved the idea of control. You loved the money. And now it's gone. Your choices brought you here. My father opened his mouth again, and this time my grandfather spoke. His presence commanding the room. You've already had your chance, he said, voice low, calm, and sharp. You chose greed. You chose cruelty. Now you must face the consequences. My mother sank into a chair, tears flowing freely. My father's hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. The two of them were powerless in the world they had built for themselves, suddenly small, exposed, and irrelevant. I realized something profound. I wasn't the scared girl anymore. I wasn't begging for mercy or searching for their approval. I had grown beyond them, beyond their world, beyond their influence. You wanted a family? I said quietly. You had one? You threw us out. You tried to destroy us. And now you watch as life moves on without you. That is your family. The words hit harder than any slap. I turned and walked away, past the sunlit halls, past the gardens my grandfather had nurtured, past the life we had rebuilt. For the first time in my life, I felt true freedom because some people will never change. Some people will never see the value of what they have. And some people are not meant to be family. I walked to the balcony overlooking the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, wild, unstoppable. And I knew in my heart that my life was finally mine, not stolen, not borrowed, mine. And from that day forward, I vowed never to let anyone take it from me again. The mansion had finally fallen silent. Not the kind of silence that feels empty or lonely. This was the calm after the storm. The kind of silence that tells you survived. You endured. You won. I stood in the grand hallway, looking at the family portraits my grandfather had restored. Not the fake smiles of people who never cared, but the real faces of those who fought beside us, those who chose love over greed. Mrs. Evelyn Rose Heron, sitting in her new room at Sunrise Meadows, had sent flowers with a note. You do not walk alone. You never will. Lauren, my rock, my shield, my sister, in every sense of the word, had moved into the spare bedroom of my little house nearby. Together, we had repainted walls, replaced cold motel memories with warmth, laughter, and color. Every morning, her smile reminded me that family isn't blood, it's loyalty, trust, and love. The legal battles were finally over. Kimberly Brooks and Colton Brooks were behind bars, paying the price for their greed. My father had lost everything he once thought was his. And while part of me wanted to feel vindictive, I realized revenge had already been served by life itself. No one could undo the choices they made. no matter how much they cried, begged, or schemed. My grandfather and I often sat on the balcony together, watching the ocean stretch endlessly into the horizon. He would tell stories of his youth, of battles fought in silence, of a world he never let break him. And I would listen, feeling the weight of our shared history, but also the lightness of our future. For the first time, I didn't wake up fearing the world. I woke up wanting to shape it, to give back what was taken from the lost and forgotten, to honor those like Mrs. Evelyn, whose quiet acts of kindness had saved my life. I used part of my inheritance to create scholarships and safe spaces for at-risk youth in Sedgwick County, kids who had no one, who had been overlooked, who had been abandoned by those who should have protected them. And I saw in their eyes the same spark Mrs. Evelyn had seen in mine, a spark that refused to die no matter how dark the night. Lauren continued her studies, full-time at Witch Estate, with a scholarship I set up in her name. The diner became just a memory, a symbol of where we started, not where we belonged. And me, I finally embraced the person I had fought so hard to become. A woman who had faced betrayal, threats, and fear and had emerged stronger, wiser and unbroken. A woman who knew that family isn't who gives birth to you, it's who chooses to stand by you. Sometimes when I looked out over the mansion grounds, I would see a shadow of what once was, the fear, the cold streets, the nights spent counting pennies. But those shadows didn't haunt me anymore. They reminded me of how far I had come, of the kindness of strangers that became family, of the love we chose, not the love we were given. And in those quiet moments, I finally understood the truth my grandfather had always known. The people who try to break you don't define your life. The people who stay, who fight, who love, those are the ones who shape it. Sometimes kindness comes from strangers when family fails you. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who hurt you most. And sometimes the people you choose are the family who saves you. I walked through the mansion gardens, past the roses and fountains, feeling the wind on my face. I smiled because I had everything I needed. Not just the money, not just the safety, not just the name, but something far more precious, a life rebuilt on truth, love, and choice. And for the first time ever, I was free. And I saw in their eyes the same spark Mrs. Evelyn had seen in mine, a spark that refused to die no matter how dark the night. Lauren continued her studies, full-time at Witch Estate, with a scholarship I set up in her name. The diner became just a memory, a symbol of where we started, not where we belonged. And me, I finally embraced the person I had fought so hard to become. A woman who had faced betrayal, threats, and fear and had emerged stronger, wiser and unbroken. A woman who knew that family isn't who gives birth to you, it's who chooses to stand by you. Sometimes when I looked out over the mansion grounds, I would see a shadow of what once was, the fear, the cold streets, the nights spent counting pennies. But those shadows didn't haunt me anymore. They reminded me of how far I had come, of the kindness of strangers that became family, of the love we chose, not the love we were given. And in those quiet moments, I finally understood the truth my grandfather had always known. The people who try to break you don't define your life. The people who stay, who fight, who love, those are the ones who shape it. Sometimes kindness comes from strangers when family fails you. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who hurt you most. And sometimes the people you choose are the family who saves you. I walked through the mansion gardens, past the roses and fountains, feeling the wind on my face. I smiled because I had everything I needed. Not just the money, not just the safety, not just the name, but something far more precious, a life rebuilt on truth, love, and choice. And for the first time ever, I was free.